There is a kind of pain that doesn't bleed. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for permission to enter. It simply settles inside you, quietly, slowly, like dust on an old shelf. And most people spend years, decades, carrying it without ever knowing what it is. But today, I want to call it by its name. Today, I want to look directly at something most people are too ashamed to admit, even to themselves. The exhaustion of needing to be chosen. The silent suffering of waiting to be seen. The invisible weight of loving someone, or many people, more than they will ever love you back. That is what we are talking about today. Not begging with words. Not asking out loud for what you need. But the deeper kind of begging, the one that happens in gestures, in silences, in the extra effort you put in hoping someone will finally notice, in the way you shrink yourself so others feel comfortable, in the way you say, "It's fine," when nothing about it is fine. That is what it means to beg for attention. And if you have never heard anyone say it that clearly before, I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because this message is not for everyone. It is for the ones who have been waiting. The ones who keep giving and giving, hoping that at some point, someone will finally give back. Not because you asked, but because they truly wanted to. And yet, the call doesn't come. The message doesn't arrive. The recognition never quite lands the way you needed it to. So you try again. You adjust. You give more. You become quieter, smaller, more accommodating. And still, the silence returns. If any part of what I just said touched something in you, if there's a familiar ache somewhere in your chest right now, I want you to stay with me. Because what comes next is not about blame. It is not about the people who didn't see you. It is about something far more important than that. It is about you. There is an old idea, ancient, really, that has been around long before any of us were born. The Stoics, those quiet thinkers of another age, spoke about something they called dignity. Not the kind you perform for others. Not the kind you earn through applause or validation. But the kind that lives inside a person, untouched by whether anyone claps or not. Marcus Aurelius, a man who had the attention of an entire empire, wrote in private, in the quiet of his own thoughts, words that were never meant to be read by anyone else. He wrote about the danger of depending on the opinions of others. He wrote about how a man who needs to be admired has already surrendered the most important part of himself. Think about that. A man who had everything the world could offer, power, fame, the gaze of millions, and he spent his private hours warning himself, do not lose yourself chasing what others think of you. That is not a lesson from another time. That is a lesson for right now. For today. For the version of you sitting here, listening to this, carrying a weight you were never supposed to carry alone. Because here is the truth that most people are afraid to say out loud. When you beg for attention, even silently, even gently, even with love, you are telling the universe that you do not believe you are worthy of being loved simply for existing. You are saying, with every extra effort, with every unanswered message you follow up on, with every time you made yourself available to someone who made themselves unavailable to you, you are saying, I am not enough as I am. I must earn my place here. I must prove I deserve to be seen. And that belief, that quiet, devastating belief, is where the suffering begins. Not in the other person. Not in what they did or didn't do. But in the moment you decided that their attention was the measure of your worth. I want to pause here for a second and just breathe. Because I know this is hitting somewhere deep. And if you are feeling something right now, something that has been sitting in your chest for a long time, I want you to know that is not weakness. That is recognition. That is the beginning of something honest. If this reflection is speaking to you, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Not for me, but so this message can reach someone else who is sitting alone right now, carrying the exact same weight you've been carrying, and wondering if anyone in the world understands. Now let me ask you something. And I want you to answer honestly, not to me, but to yourself. How many times have you done something beautiful and immediately looked around to see if anyone noticed? How many times have you been kind, generous, patient, and then felt that quiet sting of disappointment when no one said, thank you, when no one acknowledged what you gave? How many times have you reduced yourself, your voice, your needs, your boundaries, because you feared that being fully yourself would drive people away? Take your time with that. There's no rush here. This is not a lecture. This is a mirror. Epictetus, a man who was born a slave and became one of the greatest minds in history, said something that took me a long time to truly understand. He said, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." On the surface, that sounds like giving up, like surrendering, like accepting less than you deserve. But that is not what he meant. What he was pointing at was something far more radical. You cannot control whether people see you. You cannot control whether they value you. You cannot control whether they stay, or leave, or choose you. But you can, completely, absolutely, always, control whether you let their blindness become the definition of your worth. That is the turning point. Not the moment when people finally start treating you right. Not the moment when someone finally says what you needed to hear. The turning point is the moment you decide, quietly, firmly, without drama, that your value does not live in someone else's hands. I know that might sound simple. And I know that for many of you, it doesn't feel simple at all. Because when you have spent years, maybe a lifetime, measuring yourself through the eyes of others, through the love they gave or didn't give, through the approval you chased across relationships, jobs, family, it doesn't just stop because someone says, "You are enough." It stops, slowly, painfully, honestly, when you begin to look at the pattern. When you begin to see not just the people who didn't choose you, but the part of you that kept returning to them, kept offering more, kept adjusting, kept hoping. And when you see that pattern clearly, not with shame, not with self-punishment, but with the honest, steady gaze of someone who is finally ready to understand, that is when something begins to change. Seneca wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." And living, really living, means being willing to look at the parts of yourself that you have been avoiding. The part that flinches when no one responds. The part that rehearses conversations hoping for a different outcome. The part that has been waiting, patiently, quietly, loyally, for someone to finally show up the way you showed up for them. That part deserves your attention far more than the people who never gave you theirs. And before we go deeper, I want you to know something. I left something in the comments for those who are feeling this reflection in a very personal way. Something simple and quiet that goes deeper into this pain, for those who want to sit with it a little longer, away from the noise in their own time. Because some things deserve to be felt slowly. And this is one of them. There is a moment in a person's life that doesn't look like a breakthrough from the outside. No one celebrates it. No one notices it happened. There are no words exchanged, no dramatic decisions made, no doors slammed or bridges burned. It is quiet. Almost invisible. It is the moment a person, tired, worn, finally honest with themselves, simply stops. Stops explaining themselves to people who were never truly listening. Stops adjusting their personality to make others more comfortable. Stops shrinking their needs to fit inside someone else's indifference. Stops performing gratitude they don't feel, warmth they've already exhausted, patience they no longer have to give. That moment, that silent, internal decision, is one of the most courageous things a human being can ever do. And almost no one talks about it. Because we live in a world that rewards self-sacrifice, that applauds the ones who give everything, that calls it love when you abandon yourself for others, that calls it strength when you swallow your pain and keep going. But what no one tells you is this. There is a difference between choosing to give and needing to give in order to feel worthy of staying in the room. One is love. The other is fear wearing the mask of love. And most people, good, generous, sincere people, have been confusing the two for most of their lives. I want to say that again, slowly. There is a difference between loving someone freely, with open hands, with no expectation of return, and giving endlessly because deep down you are afraid that if you stop, they will leave. Or worse, that if you stop, you will have nothing left to offer. And if you have nothing left to offer, maybe you have no reason to be here. That thought, that is the root. That is the place where the begging begins. long before any words are spoken, long before any gesture is made. It begins in the belief that your presence is not enough, that you are not enough, that love must be earned, maintained, proven, every single day, with every single action, or it will disappear. And I want to ask you something gently. Where did you learn that? Not in a blaming way. Not in a way that points fingers at anyone. But genuinely, where did that belief enter you? Was it early? Was it in a home where love felt conditional? Where attention had to be earned? Where being quiet was safer than being real? Was it in a relationship that slowly convinced you that your needs were too much, your feelings were too heavy, your presence was somehow, always, too much or not enough? You don't have to answer out loud. But I want you to feel the question land. Because the Stoics believed, and this is something I return to often, that the unexamined life produces suffering that compounds. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are." Looking things in the face. Knowing them for what they are. Not what you wish they were. Not what you were told they should be. What they are. And what this is, this pattern of shrinking, adjusting, overgiving, waiting, hoping, is not love. It is a wound that learned to walk. It is pain that found a way to keep moving by convincing itself it was devotion. And the only way out of that, the only honest, lasting, real way out, is not to find someone who finally sees you. It is to become someone who no longer needs to be seen by the wrong people in order to feel real. That shift, from seeking to standing, is not something that happens overnight. It doesn't happen because you read something, or hear something, or decide intellectually that it makes sense. It happens in the body, in the gut, in the slow, quiet accumulation of moments where you chose yourself, not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly, where you said, without any audience, "This is enough. I am enough. And I do not need to prove it." Epictetus, that freed slave who became a philosopher, understood something about dignity that most free men never learn. He said that no one can take from you what is truly yours. Not your freedom of thought. Not your sense of self. Not the quiet knowledge of your own worth. Those things live inside you. And they are yours, entirely, completely, unconditionally yours, whether or not a single person in your life ever acknowledges them. That is not an idea to be agreed with in theory. That is a practice. A daily practice. A returning, over and over again, to the center of yourself, especially on the days when the world is loudest and your confidence is quietest. And here I want to pause, because I know many of you listening to this have been carrying something specific. Maybe a relationship that took more than it gave. Maybe a friendship that slowly became one-sided. Maybe a family dynamic that made you feel invisible no matter how hard you tried to be seen. Maybe it's a loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who simply never truly showed up for you. That kind of loneliness is the deepest kind. And it deserves to be named. If what you're feeling right now has layers, if this reflection is opening something that you've kept closed for a long time, I want you to know that I left a small book in the comments. It speaks directly to this pain we are touching here. Gently. Without hurry. Without judgment. For those who want to continue this reflection in the quiet of their own home, in their own time, it is there, waiting for you. Now, let's go a little deeper. Because there is something that nobody talks about when the subject is self-worth and attention. Something uncomfortable. Something that stings a little when you finally see it. And it is this. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the person we most desperately want attention from is ourselves. Think about that. How many times have you dismissed your own feelings? Minimized your own pain? Said to yourself, "Others have it worse. I shouldn't complain. What I feel doesn't really matter." How many times have you been your own worst judge? More harsh, more impatient, more dismissive of yourself than you would ever dream of being with someone you love. That is a form of begging too. Begging yourself to finally be worthy of your own compassion. And it is, perhaps, the most important one to heal. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And I believe that. I believe that much of the pain we carry, the replayed conversations, the rehearsed arguments, the imagined rejections, the anticipated disappointments, lives not in what happened, but in the story we keep telling ourselves about what happened. The story that says, "They didn't respond because I'm not important." The story that says, "They chose someone else because I'm not enough." The story that says, "I will always be the one who loves more, gives more, stays longer, and still ends up alone." That story, no matter how many times life seemed to confirm it, is not the truth. It is a wound speaking. It is fear narrating. It is pain trying to protect itself by preparing for the worst. And it deserves, not agreement, but compassion. And then, gently, a rewrite. Because you are not the sum of the people who didn't choose you. You are not the total of every unanswered message, every overlooked effort, every time someone looked through you instead of at you. You are something far older than those moments. Far deeper. Far more constant. And the work, the real, quiet, dignified work, is learning to live from that deeper place. Not from the place of needing to be chosen, but from the place of already knowing your worth, even when no one else is looking. If this reflection is landing somewhere real for you, if you've been nodding along in your own quiet way, I want to invite you to leave a word in the comments. Just one word. Whatever this reflection has stirred inside you. It could be peace. It could be pain. It could be recognition. It could be something only you understand. But leave it there. Because sometimes, naming what you feel is the first step toward releasing it. Don't beg for attention. Part 3. The life that begins when you stop waiting. There comes a point in life when you realize something that no one prepared you for. Something that arrives quietly, usually after a long season of disappointment, after one too many moments of giving everything and receiving very little in return. It arrives not as an answer, not as a relief, not as a celebration. It arrives as a stillness. A deep, unshakable stillness that settles somewhere between your chest and your breath. And in that stillness, something becomes clear. Not because someone finally explained it to you, not because life suddenly became easier, but because you have lived long enough, hurt deeply enough, and waited patiently enough to finally understand. The life you were waiting for was never going to be given to you by the people you were waiting on. That is not a bitter truth. That is a liberating one. Because everything changes the moment you stop orienting your life around who sees you and who doesn't. Everything shifts when you stop measuring your days by how much attention came your way, how many people acknowledged what you did, how many voices confirmed that you are worthy of being here. When that stops being the measure, and something quieter, something internal, something real takes its place, life opens in a way that no external approval could ever manufacture. Marcus Aurelius spent years leading one of the most powerful empires in human history. He was surrounded by admirers, by people who needed him, by people who feared him, by people who praised him endlessly. And yet he wrote, to himself in private, words that sound like the confession of a man who understood that all of it meant nothing if he had not first made peace with himself. He wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Not in what others give you. Not in how many people choose you. Not in the recognition, the applause, the acknowledgement. Within yourself. In your way of thinking. That is not a small idea. That is a revolution. And I truly know, that for some of you, that feels almost impossible to believe right now. Because you have been told, by relationships, by family, by years of experience, that what you feel inside doesn't matter as much as how others respond to you. You have been trained, slowly and carefully, to look outward for the answer to a question that only lives inward. Am I enough? And so you looked outward. You looked at how people treated you. You looked at how much they gave back. You looked at whether they stayed. You looked at whether they called. You looked at whether they noticed when you were hurting. And when they didn't, when the silence came back instead of warmth, you took it as evidence. Evidence that the answer to that quiet, lifelong question was no. But I want to offer you something different today. What if their silence was never evidence of your worth? What if the people who couldn't see you were simply people who couldn't see? Not because of what you lacked, but because of what they carried. What if the love you gave that was never returned was not wasted, but simply given to the wrong address? What if, and I want you to sit with this carefully, what if the greatest thing that could ever happen to you is that you stop waiting for the wrong people to finally give you what only you can give yourself? Epictetus said something once that I have never been able to forget. He said, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." Not denial. Not pretending the pain isn't real, but a deliberate, courageous, daily choice to return your attention to what is already present. To the breath you're taking right now. To the fact that you are here, listening, feeling, alive. To the people, perhaps few, perhaps quiet, who have shown up for you in small ways that you may have overlooked because you were too focused on the ones who didn't. To the strength that got you through every hard season you were convinced you wouldn't survive. To the wisdom you carry now that you did not have 10 years ago. Wisdom that cost you something real, that was earned in the quiet hours, in the painful seasons, in the long nights when no one came. That wisdom is yours. No one can take it. No one gave it to you. You built it, slowly, painfully, honestly, and it is worth more than any applause you were ever denied. There is a kind of freedom that only arrives after a long, honest reckoning with yourself. Not the freedom of having everything you want. Not the freedom of being loved by everyone you hoped would love you. But the freedom of no longer needing things to be different in order to feel at peace. The freedom of sitting in the middle of your life, with all its imperfections, all its disappointments, all its unfinished chapters, and saying, quietly, without performance, "I am still here. I have not been broken. And I know who I am, not because anyone confirmed it, but because I stopped waiting for the confirmation and started living from the truth." That is not arrogance. That is dignity. And dignity, real, earned, unshakable dignity, is the one thing that cannot be begged for. It can only be chosen. Over and over. In the small moments. In the invisible decisions. In the way you treat yourself when no one is watching. I want to speak now to the part of you that is tired. Because I know you are. Not just physically tired. But tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Tired of carrying so much for so long. Tired of being the strong one, the understanding one, the one who never complains. Tired of loving without being loved back in the same measure. Tired of showing up for people who somehow always manage to be absent when it's your turn to need someone. Tired of explaining yourself to people who decided long ago they weren't interested in understanding you. I hear that. And I want to say something to that tiredness, not to dismiss it, not to rush past it, but to honor it. That tiredness is not weakness. It is the weight of years of love that deserved more than it received. And you are allowed to put it down now. You are allowed to stop carrying what was never yours to carry alone. Seneca wrote, "Begin at once to live, and count each separate day as a separate life." Each day, separate, new, not dragging the weight of every disappointment from every day that came before. Not rehearsing the rejection of yesterday into the morning of today, but beginning, quietly, firmly, with intention, to live as someone who has already decided that their life has value, not because it was confirmed by others, but because they chose to live it as if that were simply, plainly, undeniably true. And I want to ask you something before we reach the end of this reflection. What would your life look like if you completely stopped begging for attention? Not just the obvious kind, not just the loud gestures, the repeated messages, the over-explaining, but the subtle kind. What if you stopped adjusting your opinions the moment you sensed someone disagreed? What if you stopped shrinking your joy because you feared it made others uncomfortable? What if you stopped apologizing for your needs as if having them was an inconvenience to the world? What if you stopped waiting for permission, for validation, for someone to finally give you the signal that it is acceptable to take up space? What would be left? I think what would be left is the truest version of you. The one that existed before the world started teaching you that you needed to earn your place in it. The one that is still in there, beneath the years, beneath the adjustments, beneath the quiet ache of all the times you made yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. That version of you has not disappeared. It has simply been waiting, not for someone else to call it forward, but for you to stop waiting on others long enough to finally come home to yourself. And that is where this reflection ends. Not with an answer. Not with a solution. Not with a list of things to do, or habits to build, or steps to follow. But with a question that I want to leave living inside you long after this video ends. What becomes possible in your life the moment you decide that your worth is not a question that requires anyone else's answer? Sit with that. Not for minutes. 4 days, if needed. 4 weeks. Because the Stoics knew, and the years teach us, if we let them, that the most important truths are not the ones that arrive quickly and feel good immediately. They are the ones that arrive slowly, settle deeply, and quietly rearrange everything from the inside out. This is one of those truths. You were never meant to beg for a place in the hearts of people who were not built to hold you. You were meant to stand, fully, quietly, with a kind of dignity that doesn't need a crowd, in the truth of who you are. And the people who are meant to see that will see it. Not because you performed it. Not because you earned it. Not because you finally said the right thing or gave enough or stayed patient long enough. But because real people, the ones worth holding on to, recognize real. They recognize someone who has stopped pretending. Someone who has stopped shrinking. Someone who has come home to themselves and decided to stay. Be that person. Starting today. Starting now. Starting in the quiet of this moment, with no audience, with no applause. Just you, and the truth, and the life that is still waiting to be fully, honestly, courageously lived. If this message is still echoing inside you, if something here touched a place that needed to be touched, I left something in the comments for you. Something simple. Something quiet. A small book that walks gently through this very pain, for those who want to continue this reflection at their own pace, in their own time, in the silence of their own home. It is there for you, whenever you are ready. And if this reflection mattered to you today, if even one sentence landed somewhere real, consider subscribing to this channel and sharing this with someone who might need to hear exactly this, right now. Because somewhere, someone is sitting alone with this same weight. And maybe your small gesture is what carries this message to them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having the courage to sit with a truth this honest. Rest now. You have been carrying enough.